So, I have a bit of a problem. A paint problem. I'm pretty obsessed with paint, and I love it. I have a lot of it. This is just some of it. I've got more craft paint hiding in my closet, so I figured I should do something useful with it. Today, I'm going to be seeing what student grade acrylic paint, or most of them are student grade, work the best. I'm going to be testing Blick, Master's Collection, Basics, Artist Lofts, Reeves, and Winsor Newton. Not doing all of these for each of them because I didn't have all of them, but pretty close. So in this first one, we're going to be testing blacks. For this test in black, I'm going to be testing Blick, Master's Touch, Artist Loft, and Reeves. Let's get a look at the paint. This is the Blick. Comes out real easy, other than it's just a hard container. The Master's Touch is creamy, as well as the Artist Loft and the Reeves. In testing each of these, I kind of test for just how the paint feels and how it applies. I thought that Master's Touch and Reeves had the nicest feel. Next, let's check how the opacity is. Is it going to cover both of these lines? It's black, so they all cover it pretty well, except for I did notice, and you can't see it because the lighting's not great, but the Artist Loft is the only one that didn't cover it. Next, let's see how the paint moves. My favorite was how the Reeves moved. And next, let's see how well it builds. We're going to see how many coats it takes to completely cover these. Notice that the Master's Touch is nice, but a little tiny bit dry, not too dry. The Blick is very watery. And with 2 coats, all of these were completely covered. It is black, so that shouldn't be too hard. And overall, I thought the Blick was okay, but it was quite watery. The Master's Touch was good, but it looked a little gray when dried. Artist Loft was too brown, too thin, and the only one to show the lines through. And the Reeves was a creamy, perfect black. Next, let's move on to yellow. For this one, I've got an extra one, so we're going to be doing Blick, Master's Touch, Artist Loft, Basics, and Reeves. Let's get a look at the paint. Blick is quite liquid. Master's Touch is a little creamier. This Artist Loft is a little old, but not super old, but it is pretty lumpy. Basics is nice and creamy. And so is the Reeves. Let's get a look at their feel. Look how watery that Blick is. Master's Touch was nice and smooth, and the Artist Loft is lumpy, which, I mean, you saw the texture of it. Basics was also nice and creamy, as well as with the Reeves, but my favorites were the Master's Touch and the Basics. Let's get a look at opacity. This is yellow, so they're not really that opaque. It's a very light color, so to be expected. I thought that the Master's Touch and the Basics did the best job of color covering the line. And for movement, the Blick does move really well, but it is just very watery. My favorite was the Basics. And now we're moving on to opacity. Let's see how many layers it takes to cover a line with yellow. We're going to be skipping through this because it did take a little bit of time. One thing I really noticed, just to show how watery the Blick paint was, is it's the only one, if you can see, that's actually smudging the ink from the line I drew. And it seems to smudge layer through layer, like it gets worse as it goes along. The Artist Loft is still pretty lumpy, and I'm liking in general how the Master's Touch, the Basics, and the Reeves are moving. Look at how much that Dick Blick has smeared that line. We're finally seeing a little bit of coverage here, both in the Basics and the Master's Touch. Another funny thing about the Artist Loft is as it's building, it's seeming to change color from more of a yellow to an orange. In general, my thoughts are that the Blick was really watery, only one to make it run. Master's Touch was creamy, good coverage. The Artist Loft was dry, it changes to more of an orange color. Basics was creamy, pretty good coverage, and Reeves was okay but disappointing pigment. So let's move on to red. For this one, we're going to be testing even more. We've got Blick, Master's Touch, Artist Loft, Basics, Winsor Newton, and we'll also be testing Reeves. I thought all of these had a pretty nice texture to them, coming straight out of the tube. Blick is very watery. The Artist Loft was pretty nice, Master's Touch. As a general coat, I thought all of these performed fairly well. Except for the Blick, it's just very watery. My favorite was the Master's Touch and the Winsor Newton. All of these reds, they're slightly different shades because I didn't have the exact same tint, but they're all, pretty translucent, but the best were the Winsor and the Master's Touch. Let's check out the movement of the paint. You'll see each of these kind of has a different feel to it and how thick and thin you can make things, how well it stays within the brush. My favorite was the Winsor. It was just nice and smooth and consistent. Let's check out the buildability. You can really tell how watery that Blick is. Just see how rounded the corners are compared to the other ones. And that happens in kind of all of them that I test of Blick materials. I'm partially doing this because I was so disappointed. I ordered a bunch of Dick Blick student grade acrylics in hopes of teaching a class, and they were just not good enough, and it was going to cost me too much to send them back. So I've been trying to find ways to use them without subjecting them to other people. You'll see around the fourth coat we're starting to get some different opacities, and as a matter of fact I've decided the Artist Loft is completely opaque, followed up by the Reeves in the fifth round. These build much quicker than the yellows did. Winsor came in third. So overall, Blick was too watery, translucent. It did have a little bit of seepage. Master's Touch, I like the feel of it the most. Artist Loft was good opacity, but not smooth, pretty lumpy. Basics feels good to work with. Winsor Newton, good feel, decent opacity. And Reeves builds well, but it felt kind of dry to work with. Next, we're moving on to the greens. We've got Blick, Master's Touch, Artist Loft, Winsor, and Reeves. I love how paint looks when it comes out of tubes. These are not all the same color, so don't judge them all equally. Some were a phthalo green and I did not have the exact colors. Let's check out the feel. Reeves and Blick are technically both phthalo. I thought that, yeah, the Artist Loft and the Reeves were the best. As far as opacity, green is a slightly darker shade, so we should be seeing some coverage, but especially the more sap greens are going to be lighter. Artist Loft and Winsor seem to do the best. Ooh, I like how that Master's Touch moved. Let's see how I graded it. Yeah, both that and the Reeves did quite well. And let's get to building. I had to speed this up quite a bit in order for this not to take a million years to show you, so you can't really see how it works too well, but even on the second coat we're getting quite a bit of opacity, which is nice, especially in more of the sappy colors. The one thing that was bothering me about the Winsor was that the color on the actual package looks nothing like the color that comes out of the tube. The rest of them all have kind of a translucent packaging, so there's not as much false advertising, but that did bother me. You know, you buy the Winsor in a completely opaque package and you can't actually see the paint within it, so you have to trust what their label said. Now we're just down to the Master's Touch and the Blick, and we're going to cut it off at 10 coats because I don't want to be there all night. So in general, Blick was similar colored Reeves, but it was more watery, didn't build as well. Master's Touch had the nicest feel to it. Artist Loft had the best opacity, but it was dry to work with and it dried very matte. Winsor Newton was the least close to the advertised color, and the Reeves, it felt okay. I don't have complaints or accolades for it. So I tried to give this kind of a scientific method to figure out what worked best. I broke it into general feel, opacity, movement, buildability, and the overall score. Blick scored the lowest. It basically just got points for being paint on a page. In second place was the basics, but that wasn't really a fair review because I didn't test it across as many colors. I think it would have performed pretty well. I assume it'd be better than Artist Loft, which was in third place, or third to last place. And this one I really had a problem with because the paint did not seem to keep very well. It got very lumpy. Winsor, again, I didn't test as many, and I think this one have maybe outperformed most of them. It was pretty good overall. Master's Touch is my favorite to work with, but it was beat out by Reeves, which did surprise me because when I've painted with Reeves, I didn't quite like the result. But that might just because I'm working from such small tubes. In order to buy Reeves, you can't buy just one color, really. You have to buy the smaller set of tubes, so for a set of like 10 tubes, it costs you about $15, whereas you can go out and buy one color of Master's Touch in 8 or 4 ounces, and when you find them on sale at Hobby Lobby, they're only around $2 or $3. Blick is around $5 for 8 ounces. Artist Loft and Basics are very similar to Master's Touch, whereas Winsor, which seems to be a nicer paint, it can cost about $8 per 2-ounce tube, so you've really got to be aware of what you're buying for that. My general favorite is Master's Touch, and I guess I'd kind of known that, but hadn't exactly known that when I went into this test. And I think that I chose that to be my favorite overall because of that general feel. You'll see that that is the number one of the general feel. The Winsor does have kind of a similar feel to it, but Master's Touch just has an even creamier texture. So if you like to work with kind of thick, creamy paint, I recommend Master's Touch. I didn't have whites to test, but their white is especially creamy. As far as movement, I was surprised by the Reeves. It seemed to move the best out of all the paints. This is a personal opinion, so paint with what works for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more videos like this, please subscribe.